today?
Not at this hour, no.
Okay, yeah, I like your background.
Beautiful background, love that.
So what was I going to say about
Rule-based, yeah.
Rules and calculus.
Oh yeah, the point being that the math is pretty straightforward and not obscure at all. But for some reason or another, trying to explain why rule-based systems are dysfunctional and chaotic and a bad idea, and why mathematically based guidance systems would make sense, I can't get anywhere with anybody.
Well, because you're using math, and math is a very advanced.
Sam's father is a mathematician, writes books on mathematics.
I understand. I'm not saying you can't. The trouble is that if you try to get a 7th grader to understand the math you're talking about, we have trouble, right? So you have to imagine that people are at the 7th level. I mean, think of this way: when you walk into a store to get some grocery, you give them $1 and you buy a 25-cent candy, and they need to use a register or calculator to figure out the change. What level is that?
Yeah, I remember in the Stop and Shop, this is probably 10 years ago, there was an item, I think it was chicken or something, buy one, get one free.
Yeah.
And then it said, and you save, and it says the amount that you save. It was completely wrong.
Yeah.
And I finally the guy says, that's not the savings. If you buy one, get one free, this is what you're paying. And he just didn't, they didn't get it.
Well, in the new math, it's more important to know what you're doing than to get the correct answer, right?
Yeah.
To know how to get there.
I mean, think of this way: this multi-million-dollar airline industry was going at some kind of thing. If you buy this, they give you buy some candy bar or something, you get like 5,000 points or something. And this guy on the news was getting like millions of miles, so he gets 5 first class to go around the world 5 times or something like that for like a couple $1,000 or something along that line. And it's just a simple math from my perspective. Like, that's a good deal because 5,000 points equivalent to how much money is that worth compared to my, $5 for my candy. It's like, okay, so you try to do the calculus versus the rule-based thing, you don't stand a chance of people understanding you, my friend.
There's a book that I've probably owned for 30 years called Innumeracy. You ever seen that title? Innumeracy.
I heard about it.
John Paulos, I think, was the author. I'm sort of forgetting his name. But the point is that illiteracy, everybody knows what illiteracy is. Innumeracy, much worse, but nobody knows what it is. Which is an instance of illiteracy, not knowing what numeracy is.
So the example I posted in the chat was comparing the Apollo 1969 moon mission to Chandrayaan, which just landed on the South Pole. So in Apollo, there was a lot of math. You had people verifying the trajectories, doing the mid-course corrections, and even the guidance computer was amazing. It was looking at star positions to figure out if you're on course or not. And now with Chandrayaan, it's a lot of AI for the computer, the robot, to make the decisions about, should I fire my rockets? Is it too rocky there? So it's a lot of machine, well, I wouldn't say intelligence, I would say pattern matching. So is that sort of where you're going? Like maybe there are rules in Chandrayaan that try to plot, like it's taking pictures of the surface and trying to find an optimal solution to its problem where I can land?
Well, I hadn't thought about the question of who's piloting the thing. Because I remember in our moon landing, the human took over the landing thing.
Right. Just made it. Yep.
Yeah. And I don't remember why, but they did.
Well, there were alarms in the computer that they had to ignore. And then, it was Neil who he saw his fuel running low, and then he said, okay, that's where we're landing. And he did it. Yeah.
So, but, even when I was at Bell Labs and I was solving problems which took quite a fair amount of math, one of them was a quality control problem. You've got a fleet of telephone trunks. And as they age, they drift from their specs. And eventually, some of them drift so far from the specs that they're not really usable as telephone trunks. They get noisy, they get lossy, they have other issues with them. And there had to be a policy for when to declare a trunk eligible for maintenance to tune it back up again. And they had a policy for when to declare a trunk eligible for maintenance. And it was not the most efficient policy, but it was chosen because it didn't require any math to determine that a given trunk was now eligible for maintenance. And so I made up a story. And the story was you've got three brothers who are shepherds, and they're taking turns managing the flock. And each one of them has an 8-hour shift. But they all have different policies on when to retrieve a wayward sheep, because as the sheep graze, they kind of disperse a little bit, and pretty soon they're getting wayward. So the first shepherd, I forget which, doesn't really matter. One of them had an egg timer, and he was reading Khalil Gibran. And when the egg timer ran out, he looked up to find the most wayward sheep, and he would retrieve it. So he was time driven. Every 3 minutes, he would check to see the most wayward sheep. And the second one, he was into sports, and he had chalk that you used to mark the field. So he marked a big circle, and he would play with his yo-yo. And as soon as a sheep went over the circle line, he would blow the whistle and fetch it back to the center of the meadow. And the third shepherd, he took the same chalk, but he made a series of concentric circles like a bullseye. Mm-hmm. And he labeled each annulus with the square of the distance. And he had a little calculator, and he counted the number of sheep in each annulus and multiplied it by the number in the annulus, which is the square of the distance, and added them up. And if that total was above some threshold, he would retrieve the most wayward sheep. And they each adjusted their parameter. So one had the amount of time in the egg timer, one had the radius of the big circle, and the other one had the parameter for the sum of the squares of the distances. And they adjusted their parameters so that no matter who was tending the sheep, the mean and the variance was the same of the distribution. But after that, they're different. And the question was, in an 8-hour shift, which of them is doing the least amount of work, where a unit of work is called retrieving one sheep? Now, the classical method that the Bell system was using was the middle one, that as soon as any one trunk goes over some fixed threshold, you fix it. And if you have a fixed amount of personnel, then you want to keep them working full time, you would use the first method, the time method. But it turns out that if you were distributing your personnel so that they were doing other things besides tending the flock of trunks or flock of sheep, and your objective was to maintain the distribution so that the variance was the thing that was being constrained, how much more efficient was the most of the three, was the most efficient?
The third way, right?
Yeah. So I made a computer animated simulation with just a random walk with just a little, cartoon sheep. And I showed, in each case, the policy triggered one unit of maintenance, which is to fix the most wayward one, and showed which one was doing the least amount of work. And when I would give this exercise to an audience, I was explaining this whole thing. I didn't want to explain telephone trunks because you have to explain what the hell's a telephone trunk. Just let it be sheep. I had them on the edge of their seat as to which one was the most, and I would play the videotape of the simulation as I taped it. And it worked out for the Bell system. If you consider the total amount of trunks being maintained by the Bell system, you could save $30 million a year by using method 3 over method 2. Because you were doing the thing that you wanted to do, which is maintain the variance.
So method 3 is putting more weight on the outliers
Yeah, well, basically you take the square of the deviation from the center was the parameter. So by fixing, by finding the most variant, the sheep that was farthest away, you would do the most amount of gain, and you'd only do it if the variance went over some threshold.
Okay.
And before I did the computer animation, I just had the math on just a memo, and I couldn't get even my boss, who was a department head at Bell Laboratories, to understand the idea until I went on to, in those days, a symbolics machine. The neighboring department had bought a symbolics machine, Lisp machine.
Oh, nice.
And I went and I spent a month learning Lisp. I think it was Lisp, whatever language it was, probably Lisp.
Wow.
And I did a computer animated simulation and ran the whole thing. And before I did the cartoon, they couldn't follow me. And I did the cartoon. It took me a month to do the cartoon. My department head said, "Now I understand." Yep. The most important thing anybody said was, "Give them a cartoon. Now I understand." This is at Bell Labs, right? And about that same time, the director, one notch above the department head, was giving me some feedback, quote unquote. And he said to me, with a very stern look at me, he says, "Barry," says, "you make people think." I said, "Jim, is that good or bad?" He didn't answer.
Nice.
Turns out that making people think in a think tank is not an intelligent thing to do.
You're making him think, so he's thinking, still thinking.
I asked, all he was at, I said, "Is that good or bad?"
Yeah, he's still thinking about that question.
Sounds like a Harvard case study. Does thinking help or hurt the business?
Making people think turns out to be an unpopular thing to do. Well, look at Socrates. He would make people think by asking them questions, and he was not popular. They voted him off the island. So you can save $30 million a year, for example, if you think and do the math. And if you don't do the math, you don't have to do any thinking, and you waste a lot of resources.
Yeah, this is where I have trouble with it. And maybe you can help me with this. And then I want to look at it in two different perspectives. From the executive and like CEO perspective, right? I want my employee to be able to figure it out when you get triggered. So I will go with second method because it's a simple, straightforward method, and I know it will not go wrong. But if I tell my employee to do the method number 3, every 5 minutes they go, you take out a calculator and figure this out or something along the line, they're going to lose it or something. So, but that's not important. The important thing I want to talk about is that, do you consider this phenomena as a blind spot? Or would you say that, sort of like the way it took me is that when I take my exam, my, classical math exam or something, any math exam, then I look at a question and I don't answer, I don't know how to do the answer, do the solution or whatever you call it. I'm stuck. Okay, I'm stuck in a math question. Would you call that blind spot, or that I need to learn? Or I don't know what I don't know. So this is where I'm at right now. So think of that. I'm sure you have that, Barry, that you look at a math problem, it's like, scratch your head, like, I don't know what to do with this. So would you call that a blind spot, or would you call that how come you're not thinking enough so that you can figure it out? From my perspective, it's like, you can think all you want and lose all your hair, you still couldn't figure it out until you find someone that already figured it out, or you find you have figure out your blind spot and how to decode it. And those abilities are super difficult because, a simple example I go tell you is this, this is how I explain it. Isosceles triangle, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. As simple as that. You and I know that, like, we look at somebody trying to figure this out and we smile in our faces because it's so simple.
You said
right
isosceles triangle. Did you catch that, Eric?
Yeah, it's a right triangle.
An isosceles triangle. The Wizard of Oz. Remember the Wizard of Oz?
Yes, I remember.
The isosceles triangle. The square root of the
some
of the square roots of the two sides of isosceles he gets it completely wrong.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my point to you is that for people like you and me, like simple math, like isolysis triangle is a simple thing. Like they try to figure out how long do I need to cut the wood or whatever they're trying to do. We smile, but for them, they're stuck. They have no idea what it is. And the way I explain is that people take thousands of measurements so that they can figure this out for you. So anytime someone hand you a formula, oh, so thank God. I'm so glad you spent thousands of hours and figure this out so that I get the gift of being able to use that simple equation to solve a simple problem. But when you can get to the word simple, it's such a huge gap. If you put back the equation 200 years later, before that, those people have to work hard. They have to take thousands of measurements in order to figure that out. So I want to know if you call that a thinking problem or you call that a blind spot. I that's where I'm stuck.
Naive problem. You don't know enough to how to think about it.
That's right. What do you call that?
I would call that uneducated.
Uneducated. Okay, so those Bell Lab employees, including your boss and directors, are uneducated then.
They basically were not sufficiently educated that they could read and understand the math. Now it's quality control, which is not an easy thing to understand, but this is Bell Labs after all. And this is the department that's all about maintaining the quality of the telephone network. So quality control should be something that's sort of bread and butter to them. But I'll tell you more of this. There's more to the story. Do you remember I told you a story about mopping up the spill and they wanted me to make a better mop? This is the same story. That's just
I understand.
Okay. So here's the story. They were using the second method, the bogey method, where the trunks could be, you didn't care as long as the trunk was just inside the bogey. As soon as it went over the bogey, suddenly you had to do some work, which meant that the variance could get very big because you could have a lot of trunks that are just on the breezy side of the bogey. So you had a terrible network. And the idea was the people who were responsible for supervising this second method, the problem was that they were always mopping up the mess and they wanted a better mop. Okay. So when I studied it, and I realized that they were using the wrong policy, that they were using the bogey policy instead of the variance policy, I worked out the math. And before I published it, I shared it with 2 or 3 of my peers just to make sure that, that they understood. There was a guy who had a PhD in physics, he understood it. And there was another old timer that I showed it to, and he said, Barry, he says, this looks kind of familiar. This is a guy who was just about to retire, and I was in my 30s, I think. He said, go down to the library and find some a volume of the Bell System Technical Journal from around the 1955 or so by the vice president of Long Lines, because this looks very familiar. And I went down, and it took me a while to find it. Sure enough, around 1955, the vice president of AT&T, or Bell Labs, Bell Long Lines, had to work on the same problem and to come up with the same solution. But because in those days they didn't have calculators, he said, in the meantime, until we can, have, since you don't have calculators, in the meantime, use the bogey method. It's less efficient, but you don't have to do any calculations. And he wrote it up. He said, eventually we will have computers that are taking the measurements and they can do the math. So they implemented the bogey method back in 1955 for the reason that Sam suggested, that you couldn't do the math for the computing the sums of the squares of the deviations. About 10 years later, they automated the measurements with computers. So instead of having to measure the trunks with a meter, the system was measuring the trunks automatically. And because they were using computers, he imagined that they would then also switch back to the variance. Well, guess what? The people who wrote the code didn't think like he did, and they computerized the bogey method, even though the computer was taking the method.
Very nice.
So basically, I separately rediscovered this method from 30 years before, and said, for God's sakes, computers are taking the measurement. Let the computers compute the variance. And so there was more than one bit of irony to it that I wasn't the first person to figure out the optimal method. I had repeated them, and the reason it was hard to recognize is he used different notation.
Mhm.
And my notation was more classical mathematics. His was sort of ad hoc notation. But sure enough, it would turn out when I studied it, they were mathematically the same.
Yep.
And so I developed, the flock of sheep metaphor, and the mopping up. I need a better mop. And I said, well, why don't you just fix the leaks so they don't leak so much.
Mhm.
Wow.
Wow.
And when I presented it, I mean, I had the audience on the edge of their seats with this thing. But it kind of pointed out how hard it is to introduce a mathematically optimum solution if the mathematics is it involves taking the squares of numbers.
Interesting.
This
I'm
is
also
exactly
saying-
the reason why, Barry, if I may, is I refuse to use the word stupid or idiot or dumb or something like that, because think of it this way. This is another example I usually use. I say, walk into a room, total darkness, you're gonna bounce into a lot of furniture, but all you need is a simple candle
You turn on a
that will
light.
prevent you from bumping into the furniture. So as simple as that. So the candles, we need to bring light. So meaning that we make it clear for people to see.
Yeah. So I ran into variations of this. This was sort of a moment of enlightenment, this notion that, and here's a funny thing. When I was hired by Bell Labs, I had a bachelor's in electrical engineering, and they sent me back to Stanford to get a master's first, and then again to get a PhD. So the first 5 years that I worked for Bell Laboratories, I spent most of my time at Stanford working in my graduate studies. And my thesis, my PhD thesis, was optimization theory, nonlinear optimization theory. So they had spent, I don't know, you figure out how much money they spent, in 4 or 5 years for me to develop the mathematics of optimization theory. And when I went to use it in the department in the quality control problem, my boss couldn't follow the math, even though, it wasn't that hard. And by the way, the Japanese, there was a guy in America who had worked out the math of quality control, and he couldn't sell it. And he went to Japan.
Yeah.
Is that Deming?
Deming, yes.
Yeah.
What's his
Deming
first
Award,
name?
yeah.
I'm forgetting his first name, but yeah, you're remembering it right. Deming went to Japan, and he sold the idea of quality control to the Japanese, and the Japanese, who were making terrible crap-ola transistor radios, they learned quality control from Deming, and then they started to make really good stuff that was much better quality than American-made stuff. So there was this connection to Deming. Oh, and by the way, there's a relative of Deming, I might have been a grandson or a grandnephew, who came back, I don't remember the story, maybe you remember the story, and introduced
Six Sigma.
Was it?
Six Sigma.
No, that was not the story.
In the Deming's part of the Deming education.
Yeah, but the
Motorola
story
did
was public relations? Not public relations. What's the branch? I'm trying to remember the term. I'm forgetting the name of the term, but maybe we can find it. Let's see. It'll come to me. In journalism, they taught ethics in journalism, and they taught public relations is close to the term I'm looking for, but it's not quite right.
Yeah, these days, ethics in journalism, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, but I had a friend who taught ethics in journalism.
Yeah, it used to be something cool. What I'm picking up is the optimization that you looked at in terms of linear programming, because that's what I was taught in college.
This was nonlinear programming.
Yeah, you're nonlinear, so yeah, it's more complex. So like in in work these days, there are certain types of problems that fit into a linear programming model
Right.
that can be solved.
Simplex
and-
method.
Right, right. And then in Excel, there's a solver where you can just have it put in your variables and have it come up with some solution that meets your constraints. And I think there's also a nonlinear part of it in Excel. So yeah, one of my projects was looking at the solver, trying to teach somebody in the manufacturing department about how he could use that to figure out how much safety stock he would need on hand.
Right.
And then COVID happened and all the everything. Well, they had enough, but they planned manually for that.
Yeah, the big M, little m stock, there's you stock up to capital M, and then when it drops below little m, then you order enough to get it back up to big M. And that would turn out to be one of the very simple rules, just a bogey rule.
Yep. Right.
For when to do something. And most of the time, the optimal policy was not, plus and minus bogey rules. And so you would teach the bogey rules first because it had a solution that you could understand, and the math was simple. And when it got to nonlinear programming, you had to do successive iterations. And in nonlinear programming, there was an idea due to Lagrange, the Lagrange multiplier method. And he said, if you have a resource that is constrained, so you have a certain finite amount of some resource is essential. He said, if you put a price on that resource and you choose the price carefully, then you could turn it into an ordinary optimization program where you simply multiply the amount of this resource you use by a good price, well-chosen price, and you'll end up optimizing the game without going over the limit. But the problem was finding the price.
Yeah.
Because if you made the price too little, you end up buying more of it than there existed. And if you made it too high, you didn't use all of it that was available. And so there was called the method of undetermined multipliers. And the problem is how to find the right multiplier. And what I determined was that if you have a price, it merely means that the amount that you pay goes up linearly with the amount, and because you multiply it by the price. I said, but suppose that you had not a linear price curve, but you had a curved price curve, so that the price would go up as the amount that you use went up. So instead of a linear cost curve, you had a quadratic cost curve, or any nonlinear one that went up. Then you would guess the price, and that would tell you how much you ended up using, either less or more. But if you looked at the slope of this curve at the point where you got the solution, make that the new guess.
Okay,
so you guess wrong and you end up using too little or too much, but nonetheless you have an unconstrained optimization, which is just a straight optimization problem. So now you take the slope at the place where you guess it and make that the new guess and readjust the curve, and you get the generalized Lagrangian.
Yeah, so it might converge to a price, or
right.
With
so it
chaos
turns out
theory.
so it turns out that if the problem is convex, then it's guaranteed to converge. And if it's terribly non-convex, like it's got wiggles in it, then you're kind of screwed. But if it's convex, you can prove that it converges, and you can show that it doesn't even take very many iterations. So my thesis was on the generalized Lagrangian and proof of convergence in the convex case, and then actually literally writing the algorithm, and actually used it at Bell Labs once to solve a problem with the unconstrained, using unconstrained optimizer together with the iterative generalized Lagrangian. And that was work I did in early 1970s.
Nice.
And
then the Mandelbrot set came out, and that's the similar method to iterations. And
you iterate things, and of course in iteration you get more and more decimal places. So to get pi, you iterate to get, and you basically use the previous value as the beginning of the next iteration, and you get more decimal places of correct answer. converge to the optimal solution. When my thesis advisor at Stanford, he actually wasn't even a professor. He was just he was a, what do you call it? A lecturer, instructor. He ended up becoming a professor at MIT later. And he wrote a number of books in his career. And when one of his books, I think his 5th book came out, I learned that they were going to have a big party for him at MIT. And I hadn't communicated with him since I was at Stanford. This is like 30 years later. So I go to attend, and it's a big auditorium. He's giving the talk down front, and I'm somewhere up in the seats, and keep his nose in it. So finally they break for a snack. And people are in line to get a coffee and a snack. And I see where he is in line. He's talking to somebody, and I get in line behind him. He doesn't notice I'm there, right? But we get up to the table where you finally stop, and he turns around and he sees me right behind him. And he recognizes, now it's 30 years, he recognizes me. And he says, Barry, he says, that work that we did 30 years ago, it has stood up very well. It's still relevant today. He actually used it as one chapter of one of his books, the work that I'd done as my PhD.
Nice.
So it was a big, important piece of work, but it was not only our optimization, and even when I did it at Bell Laboratories, I was over the heads of all but like one person in the center. There's only one person who had enough math, a physics guy, who could follow it.
Yeah, I found like in business, trying to explain something complicated, people always need to go to the fundamentals, very low level first. They'll stop me and say, okay, go back to this.
When you do calculus, when I was tutoring calculus, when I was undergraduate, there are a lot of people who struggle with algebra and calculus, not surprising.
Yep.
And so the math department, what do you got there? Practice of
statistics
for business and economics. You can see if any of those methods are in there. Generalized Lagrangians, how to determine the price of a product that's constrained.
That was my daughter's textbook. So I said, I want a copy. So I went out and bought a copy for myself.
Look up Lagrange's method of undetermined multipliers and generalized Lagrangians, where you can do iteratives. Anyhow, what was I lost my stack pointer.
Well, what I'm wondering is there any relation to the optimization to Eliyahu Goldrat's theories of constraints for like looking at a manufacturing plant and deciding how to organize it?
Well, anything that's a constrained optimization, where you want to maximize or minimize some objective function, but there are hard limits on floor space or personnel or supply line, whatever. As soon as you have a hard constraint, then generalized Lagrangians is one of the, still to this day, the most powerful method of solving for the how to get the most payoff, where you have a payoff plus constraints.
Yeah. So like in the book, The Goal, it was that heat shrink oven. That was the big constraint. No matter how hard everybody else worked, if it didn't get through that oven in time, your whole output. So
you have a hard limit where you go off the cliff. You get the hard limit, and you want to get as close to the cliff as you can without going off it. And so using the method of multipliers, the Lagrangian idea, but using a curved multiplier as opposed to a linear multiplier, then you could do it iteratively and find the correct value of it pretty efficiently. So what you got? Oh, you got it.
It's on a CD.
CD, you come with it.
Okay.
So you're on a CD, Barry.
I was going back to when I was tutoring algebra and calculus. So the math department would take the best students, and they would say, we'll pay you pretty good money to sit in the dorm room or wherever for an hour one night a week, and the students would come in for help for tutoring in math, and you'd write down their name and blah 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 and all this kind of. And I used to I would use the Socratic method, because you don't want to give them the answer to the homework.
Right.
you want them to think their way through the problem. And so I would use the Socratic method to get them to think their way through the problem and solve it on their own dime. But I would ask them the questions that make them do the stepwise, each incremental step. So if they couldn't do a step, I'd ask them a simpler question. And I would keep asking simpler questions until I asked them a question that was a small enough step that they could figure it out. And I would literally adjust the step size by asking bigger or easier questions.
Hmm.
But the one place where everybody got stuck was, how do you explain the concept of a limit of an infinite series or infinite sequence? And that's the sort of a fundamental of calculus, was what do you mean by something to have a limit? How do you show that something has a limit? And that's a famous epsilon delta proof, or in Nebraska was HK. They didn't use Greek letters.
There's a delta for every epsilon.
Right. For every epsilon, I can't remember which was which. One was how close you want to get. And there was another number. So I would teach the epsilon delta idea, and that was one where you had to use the Socratic method. You couldn't just tell them to; you had to walk them through it.
Yeah, I remember those problems finding limits, and it is a bit mind-boggling. Trying to think through. Okay, what is this really doing?
It goes back to Archimedes. Archimedes basically invented the calculus. For at least special case, finding the volume of a sphere and the volume of a cone, and
right.
So he invented the calculus for special cases, and it was lost. His work was lost until about a century ago, when it was rediscovered as a bleached page in a book in a monastery.
Yeah, just like that 1955 article was lost until you rediscovered it. So so that's another question. How is knowledge preserved for future generations, and who's going to find it? And right.
But it took what is it, 1,500 years before Leibniz and Newton rediscovered the calculus, which Archimedes had invented however many 1,500 years earlier, wrote it down on one piece of paper, and it got stored in a monastery library, and then some monk wanted to write poetry and he bleached the page. It was called the palimpsest, the Archimedean palimpsest. That was the word that they used for the page that had been bleached and reused to write something banal. And I realized there were 3 people in human history that we know of who worked out the calculus. By the way, the word means pebbles. Calculus is the Greek word for pebbles, because if you make pebbles small enough, you can make any shape you want. Okay. And that was the idea that Galileo said, if I can break something up into pieces, where each piece I can calculate it and I can stack the pieces up in some fashion, take slices and some way to do it. And that's a very powerful idea, which is by no means obvious. And once you understand it, it's a very powerful idea.
Yep. And then the rest of calculus is learning how to manipulate the symbols to solve these.
I mean, you start off like, how can I divide something into pieces where I can work out the math for each piece? Then how can I add them up? And that was sort of the main breakthrough. That was the main breakthrough. How to chop something up and then add up the pieces. And your hourglass is your classical example. I can break up time into little pebbles, little grains of sand.
And I think from my perspective, if I can use the word of algebra, at least you can count 1 apple, 2 apple, plus 3 apple, or whatever. So it's tangible, it's kinesthetic, you can feel it with your hand, and it's more relatable. Calculus is like way out there. It's like you can only use your brain to think about it and nothing else. It's sort of
there are concepts like the slope of a curve at a point, where if you understand slopes of triangles, you can sort of envision it. And then integration, if you take strips of paper and try to calculate the area of a curve under a curve.
So it's the less you can relate to it, the worse it gets to try to understanding it. The learning curve is much higher.
Here's the funny thing. So it took humans a long time to get till they could do the mathematics of calculus.
Right.
Now, Here's the funny thing. A toddler, a 1-year-old toddler, can solve a math problem, calculus problem in their head before they have language. I'll give you the example. You know why a toddler is called a toddler?
Why?
What's the first thing that a four-legged creature tries to do?
Crawl or walk?
Well, between crawling and walking, what's the intermediate step? Crawling is on 4 legs.
Mm-hmm.
Walking is on
2 legs.
And in between crawling and walking,
They basically hang on to the wall. They just
standing up without falling over.
Mm-hmm.
So a toddler, first thing is to learn to stand on 2 legs. Why? Because you get your eyeballs higher up. You can see farther.
right.
And also that you can then grab the food with your
Right.
hand. So a toddler is called a toddler because when you try to stand up at, say, 7, 8, 9 months, you're wobbly. Now, have you heard of the inverted pendulum problem?
Is that thing that swings back and forth
That's
at
the
the Franklin
reverse.
Institute?
Oh, yeah, it's a pendulum. So I'll go get an inverted pendulum. I'll be right back.
Okay. Just happens to have an inverted pendulum lying
Yeah,
around.
the heck is a pendulum because it's this way.
Okay.
If you think of that way.
The Franklin Institute has something.
Yeah,
that
you
swings
have it this
back
way,
and
but this way is this way.
Oh, there you go.
I need to turn off the background thingy for this.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yep.
That would help.
Yeah, plunger.
Oops, I hit the wrong button there. Let's get rid of that and get back to. All right. So here's the pendulum, right?
Hmm.
And you ever remember trying to do this?
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Balancing the
balancing it.
This is an
pendulum.
inverted pendulum.
Okay.
So when you, and children will take, a broom or something and turn it upside down and try to balance it. Now, here's the thing. In order to do this, do I look at my hand or do I look at the top? Where do I look?
You look at the top
Why?
because that's you need to go to wherever you need to go to.
I need to see what direction it's falling,
Yep.
Mhm.
fast.
You need to compensate for it.
So I can say I'm observing the directional derivative. Directional derivative is falling in that direction at that speed, and then means that I've got to move the base to stay underneath the top.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
So that's calculus, I see.
And that's calculus, and that's what a toddler has to do. A toddler starts to fall over
Right.
some direction, and they've
Right.
got to move their limbs so as to not fall over.
Right. But
And-
that one you learn it by feeling, by learning. If you don't do that, you fall.
Right.
And after fall a few more times, you figure out that you need to compensate for where the direction is falling.
So the brain is learning how to do that early
So
or
a
what?
toddler is solving the inverted pendulum problem
Mhm.
at age about 1 before they have language. Now you grow up and you have language. You go to grammar school and you can speak and you say, stand up and don't fall over. And they go, it's easy. Stand up and don't fall over. I said, how do you do that? And here's the key. I ask, once they can stand, I say, tell me the rule that you're using to not fall over. Tell me the rule that you're using to not fall over. It's not just don't fall over. That's not the rule. And of course, it's a trick question because they're not using a rule. They're computing the balance function, which means that they are observing and computing the directional derivative and then taking the function inverse to figure out where to move the base. And the segue, Dean Kahneman's segue, is solving the inverted pendulum problem in one direction because it can only fall one way. It can't fall in all directions. It falls in one way.
Yeah.
And so when it starts to fall this way, he computes the rate at which it's falling, and then he speeds up the wheels to get the base underneath it. And so when you lean forward, it runs forward. You lean backward, it runs backward. So Dean Kahneman's segue is solving the inverted pendulum problem in one direction. Dean Kahneman, he does this, 20 years ago, 25 years ago?
Mhm.
Yeah.
It is a basic problem in freshman calculus. Take the directional derivative, or in this case, just the derivative, because there's only one direction, it's only the x-axis. And then compute, how much to move the base to stay underneath it, because you got to take that rate and work it down to length. And it's an inverted, so if you ask an adult, how is it that you can stand up without falling over? They might say, well, I'm just balancing. Well, how's that work? What's your brain doing? Tell me the rule that and you can't answer the problem. If you know the math, you say, I'm not using a rule. I'm solving a problem in freshman calculus. I'm taking the function inverse of the derivative of the thing that I'm trying to control. I have to compute the derivative and then take the function inverse of that to a good approximation.
But the 2-year-old's brain is learning that, and it's using a different algorithm. So it's getting muscle memory or something being programmed in as it fails.
It's not using a word-based rule. You can't articulate you cannot articulate the balance function in the language of rules.
Right, but the brain's getting sensory input from the muscles and the joints, and it's guessing like nanosecond by nanosecond what to do there.
So the inverted pendulum problem is the classical way to point out to somebody that the balance function is called the balance function, not the balance rule.
Mm-hmm.
Because a rule says if, then, or else, but you got to do the balance function continuously. You have to take a rate of change, which is increasing, because as you start to fall over, you start to fall over faster and faster.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to take a rate of change derivative, take the inverse of that, and then map that into where do I move the base of the Segway. If you tried to write the code for the Segway with if, then, or else statements, good luck. Good luck. You got to do calculus, and try to do calculus with rules. With if you had nothing but if, then, or else statements, how could you do the calculus? You can't even solve the inverted pendulum problem, which a toddler can do at age 1, roughly, without articulating the method.
So how do you explain when you trip or step on the banana peel?
That's when you cannot react fast enough to save yourself. People fall either because they're drunk or they're tired or they're lightheaded, and they can't do the calculation fast enough and execute, because you not only have to do the calculation, you have to so if your muscles are tired and you can't make your muscles react to what your brain wants them to do, you're still going to fall over. And if you get shoved too hard, if you bump into something too violently, you don't have enough time to react to save yourself. You fall.
So how do you explain it in terms of function? So that's an interrupt.
That's a friction parameter in your function.
The thing is that even if you can't compute the function fast enough, or you can't execute the solution fast enough, what you do is you learn to fall. And people who do athletics learn how to fall, so they don't hurt themselves. They will fall, but now you change the objective to not falling, but to fall as painlessly, as effortlessly as possible. Now you learn how to brace your fall, so that you don't smash your face.
Gymnastic.
Right. So if you're doing gymnastics, you not only learn how to be graceful, you learn how to fall painfully. Change objective.
Right.
And a cat can land on its feet. So if it has time, it will articulate its body like a diver. How does a diver do a spin in the air? You go, wait a minute. How did you get angular momentum when you had no angular momentum to begin with? The answer is because you can bend your body at the waist. By being able to bend your body in different ways, you can change your angular momentum.
The first thing I learned in gymnastics was high forward roll.
So the math of gymnastics is non-trivial, but a diver can learn to do a spin in the air, and you say, how did you do that? And they won't say, oh, well, I needed to bend my body in a certain rate, a certain fulcrum point in order to change my angular momentum. They won't give you the math. They'll just say, well, you just do it.
And don't
They didn't
hesitate.
just do it. They actually solved the physics problem, not without using sentences, without using
Right.
words, without using rules.
Right.
So is the brain doing calculus as it's up in the air, twirling around?
Yep.
Or,
You're basically solving the math problem. You're solving the inverted pendulum problem or the articulated body bending, calculus. And these are problems that you can do in calculus. Not very many people actually do that many of them. I'm not
Right,
even sure. Did you ever
but
do the inverted pendulum problem in calculus? Probably
I
not.
can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a good engineering problem, and Dean Kane
sure.
turned out and made a product based on the inverted
Mhm.
pendulum.
Right, but it's not conscious to you as all that
You
math is
don't
going
map
on.
it into a articulated method.
Mhm.
Now, somebody who's got the math will sit down and write code or write the math formula or whatever. Very few people can explain how can you stand on two legs and not fall over?
Yeah, well, programmers of robots need to figure out the balancing of all the joints
Yes.
so the robots don't fall over.
Robots can dance and not fall over and
Yep.
throw things, and the math for that's non-trivial, but it's calculus. It's balancing where the different weights of your body are and where they're positioned and how they're moving, and it's non-trivial.
Yeah, so even just like a robot raising an arm,
Right.
that's a big thing because it's changing your center of gravity. And,
Yeah. And doing
yeah.
it gracefully, so when a ballet dancer does it, when the ballet dancer lifts, the guy lifts the girl, and it's all very graceful. There's a hell of a lot of math the brain has to be doing to be a ballet dancer. Hell of a lot of math.
I got another one perspective. Remember the stacking rock, that balancing on the rock on each other? Have you seen
Yeah,
those?
the balancing stones. Yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah, stone. Yeah. So where's the math on that one?
that again is working out the. You have to
Center
figure
of
out,
gravity.
where is the position where the item is not going to tip.
Right.
You have to find the fulcrum where it's balanced and put it over. So you basically have a chain. You have a chain of vectors, and you want the chain of vectors to be all in a line. If the chain of vectors is not in a line, this one's going to fall. So it's vector calculus in 3 dimensions. Well, 2 dimensions.
Yeah, the one of the most beautiful one I saw is on the TED Talk. There's on the YouTube also that this lady or this man also, they balance it like a piece of leaf with a long stem and balance on each other, and they stack on top of each other like 10, 20 layers. Remember that one? And then when you take away the feather on the last one, the whole thing fall.
Right. Yeah, very delicately balancing things and working out the math. And you can work it out intuitively. I mean, the brain can do this without expressly doing symbolic calculus.
But if you want to make a robot do that, then you do the math.
Then you got to do the math.
Or can it be a machine learning process, like a robot going through successive failures until it hits
Until
on?
you tune up the parameters. I mean, throwing a baseball or catching a baseball. I mean,
yeah. So
same story.
There are these AI robots that learned how to play hockey or soccer or whatever.
Pong, yeah.
So it just happened after millions of failures that they figured out what to do to get the goal, to get the puck into the net or whatever.
There was a robot arm that would shoot basketballs, and it got to the point where it could shoot a basketball with nearly 100% accuracy, never miss a free throw.
Yeah. So that is a neural network adjusting its probabilities of actions and coming up with something that works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
now, if it's a windy day or you're on a rocky, if you're on a boat,
right.
Forget it. This was one that was inside, no
right.
wind, nothing's in motion. The basket is not moving. All it has is picks up a basketball and throws it. And that was a problem that you could get near 100% accuracy on free throws with this robot arm that could regulate its motion of its throwing arm.
Yeah,
If
so
you
that's a
stick- if
neural
you put-
network versus a brain that could go
Right.
outside and figure out the wind, just intuitively use the wind to.
Right. The more environmental parameters. If
Mhm.
if the floor is wobbly or the
Right.
basket is moving, if there's stickum on the basketball, you
Yeah.
can think of a lot of things which make it hard.
And this is what we call keep everything constant, and you can do fine tuning on one parameter.
Yeah, so that's what Chandrian had to do. It's coming towards the moon. It has to guess, okay, which way should I go?
Right.
Well, there's rocks
But there's
there.
no wind on the moon because there's no atmosphere on the moon.
Right.
So you didn't
It's
have to
also
worry about
1/6 the gravity of Earth, so they have to consider that in the calculations.
landing a plane in a crosswind is hard.
Mhm.
Landing a plane in a headwind or a tailwind is easy, and you always want to land in a headwind. So you'd always pick the runway that had the most direct headwind. And if the headwind is constant, you're golden. If the headwind is variable, gusty, or side wind, is harder. And there's more likelihood that you'll miss, you'll have a hard landing or miss the landing or
Yeah,
bounce the landing, whatever.
You're constrained by the aerodynamics. Like you can't let roll, pitch, or yaw get out of range.
Yeah, I mean, you can adjust the flaps, and
Right.
you can adjust your speed, and there's you have a limited number of things you can control,
Mhm.
and you do it with a lot of practice.
Yeah, so the pilot has to learn those signals
Right.
of when things are getting out of control, how to correct it.
But the autopilot can fly the airplane, can do the takeoff and the landing automatically with guidance system that's doing the math, provided it can get the observational data in real time.
Yeah.
You got to get the observational data in near real time.
Mhm.
If you find out 3 seconds later what it was, it's too late.
Mhm.
And so if you study feedback control theory and guidance systems, this is second nature. But human political culture, they don't do it that way. They have these rule-based systems where you make a rule today and it's going to be in effect in 10 or 15 or 20 years. And the environment's changed and it doesn't work. It's primitive and it doesn't work.
Look at it from a couple of perspectives. So we talk about optimization. You can only do optimization when there's, like you're in a production environment. I mean, you go do optimization, you'll be buying one chicken, it's like you just need to buy one, the sample size is 1 or 2 or 3. Like optimization doesn't work quite well.
I can buy enough food that will fit in my refrigerator and cupboards and freezer. And the
Right.
freezer is the one that's most important, because if I want to buy a month's worth of food, I got to make sure that I can freeze the stuff that will spoil
Right.
less than a month. And I got to make sure that I don't have more than will fit in my freezer.
Right.
And then I can go shopping once a month.
Right. So now you put yourself into the optimizationable mode.
And I have to figure out, when do I take something out of the freezer and put it in the refrigerator? So then in 3 days, it'll be thawed out. If I put it in the freezer, if I put it in the refrigerator too soon, it's not thawed. Too late, it's been defrosted too long.
Right.
So you could build a robot to take things out of the freezer at the right time.
Yeah, right now I'm the robot.
Yeah. But you could
You do
automate.
all the math optimization in your head.
I've learned that I can buy 4 gallons of milk, divide the gallon into half gallons by putting them into half-gallon juice bottles, and put them all in the freezer. And as soon as I open one that's already thawed, I put the next frozen one in behind it in the refrigerator. And by the time I finish a half gallon of thawed out milk, the next frozen half gallon will be defrosted.
Yeah.
But it
I'd
took
love for you to have a robot that take care of you, like a nanny or whatever you call that, and you can optimize it to the hot content.
But so optimization theory, it's crude or it's precise.
Yeah.
But it's not rule-based in general. It
Yeah.
can't. The inventory one, the big M little one, that's rule-based. It's one of the few that you can get away with rule-based one, unless you have a supply chain problem, because it's based on If I order it today, I will get the delivery tomorrow or in 3 days.
Yeah, just in time delivery.
If
Yeah, that's
the
where COVID made it all break.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if the supply chain becomes erratic, then the M1, little m, big M
Right.
rule for when to reorder to restock goes out the window because I can't restock in the amount of time. But
And a lot of machine learning models, which use the past to predict the future, they just broke.
right,
Yeah.
yeah,
Totally
because the
messing
dynamics
up.
of the world changed,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and that's why your brain is designed to adjust the parameter. So you'll very slowly adjust the parameter as your body ages, as you get heavier or older or slower or whatever. The coefficients in your brain will slowly drift to the correct value for your age and weight and whatever. As your eyeball changes shape,
Compensation.
They're
Yeah.
little potentiometers inside.
yeah, little potentiometers are slowly drifting.
Yeah.
So when I was in AMD for 7 years as a quality assurance engineer, right? So we use the word Excelsior with in search of excellence. You know, every every steps of the production is a promise to our customer. That kind of thing. Yeah.
This is why engineers are so valuable, because they can do the math.
Yeah.
They can either do it very precisely or maybe a little bit crudely, but they can do it well enough for engineering purposes. And the average person can't do the engineering. They'll make a guess, and the guess is wrong, and then they go out of business. So you got to have the insight to do the math with enough precision that you can stay in business.
Yeah, so you create value for your customer, and as long as you can reduce the production cost, and the way you reduce the production cost, you create efficiency. The more efficient you are. So another way of saying is that if you're even 1% less efficient than your competition over time, it's compounded day over day.
You know why they invented soup? So that you can overstock the supply of food, and if you don't use all the food as the main dish, the next day it goes into the soup.
Nice.
And optimizing, between, can I give you a piece of beef today or a beef soup tomorrow?
Right.
If I don't sell all the beef today, I have beef soup tomorrow. This is all optimization, and there's a certain amount of math involved to get to where you can.
So same thing with the fish and chip. Leftovers fish, fresh fish tomorrow become a fish and chip, fried fish.
Right. And then it becomes, fish chowder or something. As you cook it again, keep it from
Then it becomes cat food, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's really hard to explain to people who grow up in kindergarten rule-based.
Yeah.
They don't even know that there's such a thing as calculus. That's, even though they can stand up and not fall over, they don't know there's such a thing as calculus. And by the time you get to be a 40-year-old adult, it's too late. They'll never learn to evolve beyond a rule-based regulatory mechanism to a function-based one, except in engineering, they will.
So I had calculus in high school in the advanced placement program, and another person in my class, he went to Microsoft after going to Harvard and worked on Excel. So he was able to apply what he knew about calculus. He worked on the solver.
Yeah, exactly. What sort of vexes me is how come Sam Hahn, whose father writes math books, doesn't see any difference between a rule, a protocol, a function, a model, and a system. Why he basically conflates them all into the same thing. I say, well, you learn rules in kindergarten, and then beyond that, you go to protocols, which are negotiable. And then you go to functions, which is math. And then you go to models, which use functions. Then you go to systems. And I think this is a really important thing, rules, protocols, functions, models, systems. This is a progression. And humans are still down to the kindergarten rule level.
Maybe
they're not in the production mode. That's what I say. They are only in the, I buy one fish, I'm going to finish one fish today for the day, for the meal, for the lunch or for dinner.
Or maybe it's the Lisp that he started learning. Everything is an atom in Lisp. So rules, functions, it could all be one thing, the same thing. You could just transmute them between each other.
He looked up the definition, and the definition, you remember this, Sam, he read a definition about rules and protocols. Was
Right.
two words, rules or protocols, he
Mhm.
said. And I said, why does that definition have two words with an or between them? If they're the same thing, why do you have to have two words with the disjunction between them? They claimed there's no difference. He thought protocol is a rule.
It's like protocol I see as an agreement between two parties. This is how we're going to send the data. This is how you're going to read it. A rule is like a constraint almost in a program.
It's basically one step of a multi-step process. So in a protocol, the two sides negotiate the highest level that they can jointly support.
Right.
And a rule is the minimum level that everybody has to support. And you
Okay.
never evolve beyond it. And so so rule-based is basically, I can be as sloppy as I want to be as long as I don't fall below the floor. Because the government inspectors only say, am I at least a skosh above the floor?
Yeah, it could be like you have to use Windows 10 or above, like, right? Things like that. That could be a rule because the others are insecure or whatever your company says.
And for some purposes, I don't need to have that level of security because
Right.
I'm connected to, I'm not going to be invaded by some hacker.
Right.
Using a machine that's in a firewall or just in my house, or So you learn to use protocols where you negotiate the highest level you can, the highest functional level you can, as opposed to everybody has to follow the same elementary rule.
Yeah, and that comes in play with encryption. There were older, not export type of encryption, which were less secure. We don't want to export the most secure encryption. So that's a negotiation going on there.
When this computer talks to that computer next to me, does it have to be encrypted? Why? It's on the LAN in my house.
Yeah, for you it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. But the thing is that
government it does.
But they only give you one choice. You have to use the communication protocol, and they're, by definition, they make them all encrypted, which means that my computers are working harder than they need to.
Yeah, so these vintage computers never thought about HTTPS.
Right.
Why would we encrypt our traffic? But now
I've got a server in the other room. It's a Solaris machine from the 1990s, and it's just a server. It's a billboard, right? It doesn't have to be encrypted because it's a billboard. It's a public billboard. It doesn't have to be encrypted.
Right.
And it isn't. And you use HTTP to get the web page, and that's it. You're done.
So what we do these days, we make a device that gets all the network traffic and does all the HTTPS, and then that's filtered down to the vintage machine through a serial port.
I just put a ChatGPT question. What's the difference that make the difference for rules and protocol?
Okay.
The summary is rules tend to be broader and more general purpose, designed to govern behavior, ensure fairness or safety. Protocols are more specialized and they are more often designed to facilitate specific tasks or interaction, frequently in a technical content.
One size fits all. If you're an actress, are you going to go on and buy a wardrobe off the shelf in pennies, or do you want it fitted to your body? Because you're going to be looked at by a whole bunch of people in the movie theater. So protocol basically is it's precision, optimum, as opposed to cheapest one size fits all.
So I'm interested in protocols for the decentralized web, where we are, I could make my machine into an internet server, or I could send things through the browser to another person's browser if we agree on a decentralized protocol, which, so that's something I'm playing with on a Raspberry Pi at home. And I could go somewhere else and connect to it without using, as long as it's an internet connection, without running other things. So Yeah, so there's that whole decentralized web environment, and that's where you get the mastodons and the other stuff, but people have to manage their own keys, essentially, versus the centralized services, the Googles, Microsoft, where the companies will buy into all that because it's proven. Yeah, versus, but then they could monetize your data, say, oh, Barry's been surfing over here, we're going to sell him this. Yeah.
So if I don't want Amazon to know what I'm searching, thing is, if I go to Amazon, they know what I'm searching for.
Yep.
So having an encrypted connection to Amazon, that doesn't keep Amazon from knowing what I'm searching for.
Yeah, they got an artificial intelligence Barry that they're playing games.
And then Amazon turns around and says, by the way, I will tell you, Mr. Facebook, what Barry's searching for, so you can advertise, you can then sell ads to him. So they give it away anyway. I mean, what the hell's the point of their, you don't really have any privacy. Now, what I could do is go to Amazon with a made up name. I could go Facebook with a made up name, and then they won't know that I'm really the same person, except I have the same IP address. So they sort of do know. They know,
unless you use Tor. Yeah.
So you basically, I mean, there was a story this morning of why Massachusetts was the first state to have license plates on vehicles. And there was I think it was the Boston Symphony or whatever, but the guy wanted to know who is speeding past his building, and he wanted to be able to identify them. So he talked the government into putting license plates on cars so he could find out who's speeding and making noise in front of his symphony hall.
Interesting, because like if you look at what the government did for finding terrorists, well, let's make everybody go through the airport and do all these procedures, and maybe we'll find a terrorist. Yeah.
And the government's the terrorist.
Yeah. So
type 1 and type 2 errors, and they make a lot of, which is the false positive. What's that? The type 2 error? What's the type 2? One of them is a false positive. I don't remember which is which. The government makes type 2 errors. I allege that you're a crook and they're wrong. They got made a false positive. And now I'm scared. I'm scared because I'll be mistaken, for the crook, and have to go through, hell with the system. That happens all the time.
Yeah, so like kids growing up, they're going to have profiles to get jobs. They're going to have clean records and clean social media profiles.
And if somebody hacks my account and puts crapola under my name, and they think that I did that, how do I prove that? No, that was somebody who hacked me. Well, then you didn't have a good password,
Yeah, it's complicated things coming up.
This gives people anxiety.
Oh, yes.
You want to talk about that? Let me tell you something about a year ago. A friend of mine was driving from town A to town B in China. And she texts me like, I got caught because I was speeding from, this short distance in the bridge. They know precisely where you're speeding without using a camera. Guess how they do it?
There's toll gates. You go through a toll booth.
No.
No.
The GPS they use
as
a talk to the cell tower. They know exactly what you want to do. They get all the information. Got the optimization of catching the speeder anywhere they are in the whole China.
Used to be that if you went from toll booth 1 to toll booth 2 too soon, then they knew that you were speeding.
Yeah, toll booth is one thing, but that's arcade, remember?
Now that's because that was 30 years ago.
Yeah, and it only works when there's a toll booth. Right now, you don't need toll booth. You just need satellite, and you need you're using a GPS device software on your phone.
Yeah, that they can tell whose GPS it is.
Or you're using Google to give you directions.
Right.
You cannot go anywhere without GPS, my dear.
Yeah, well, so also like the insurance companies have an app that they'll give you a discount if you use their app, and it tells you where you're going. So
And
Yeah,
that's
you're
the reason why Tesla can give you the cheapest insurance rate. You know why?
They know
They have all your
everything.
data. How you
Yep.
They know your
Yep.
driving habits. Yeah.
every
Yeah.
detail, like how you make a corner, how do you stop at the stop sign or not.
Yeah, they can model you down to epsilon.
That's right. That's optimization. That's where your math comes in. Hard, what do you call that? Hard range, hard data, hard maximizing data, hardcore data, whatever you would call that.
Yeah. You know, the next decimal point, instead of you're just assuming that everybody's average or median,
Yeah.
90th percentile, and you know.
I mean, in some way, it's kind of good. I mean, think of this way: you get the best insurance rate because you drive properly, and the guy that lives next to you is the one that crash a lot. But insurance is something. I give you an insurance topic that you see what I'm talking about. So I use the first 20, let's say the first 30 years of my business, I don't buy any insurance. So I only give credit to certain company I trust and whatever I can afford. Think of it like I walk into the casino with the money I can, pocket chain or whatever you call that. So I give very what I call conservative credit limit for the terms customer for the first 30 years of my business. And then I got the credit insurance involved. So they charge me like 0.25%, 0.25% of a transaction plus about $25,000 worth of annual fee or whatever you want to call that. So they're all that. And last year I was hit with a big amount, like close to 400,000. Okay. And guess what happened? They raised my rate by 50%. So I said to them, look, if I'm the driver of my car, if I crash, I'm a bad driver, you raise my auto insurance rate. No question about it. I'll pay for it because I'm the driver. I'm responsible for it. But because your credit insurance, you tell me who I can trust and how much I can trust it with. You are the taxi driver. I'm sitting in the back. There's nothing to do with me. I think you screwed up. You hired the wrong taxi driver or whatever you want to call that, and you crash the car I'm in, and you tell me to pay 50% more rate. Makes no sense. And they wouldn't budge anyway. So I dropped them. Like, let me go back my old way of doing things.
Now, what if
It's not-
what if AI could predict that you are going to have a serious disease and you're going to cost this health insurance company a lot of money? They could, where you're not even aware you have a disease. Would you live in that world?
I mean, think of it that way, right? If AI knows my disease and then so that I know that, okay, I'm going to die instead of 75, I die at 70. I'm fine with that. Like, so that the rest of the people can live a better life. I give out 5 years of my life, I save $30 million of medical bill. I'm cool with that. So again,
Okay, but
depending on what perspective you want to look at, like, but if I'm selfish, I want to live to 79 instead of 75. I'm going to cost another $3 billion of sustain my life. Like, what the hell is that? It's like, that's the different story. But I'm talking about credit insurance, right? They have more data. They know the people that insure. They know how number of checks they wrote, the number of checks they received. They see that data more than I do. So that's why they are a credit insurance company. That makes sense? Because
they want as much data as they can get.
Yeah, they need the data. They need the data to
they want the data, and they'll find sneaky ways to get it from you.
No,
So, like, what if they can analyze your mouse?
Yeah,
if they can analyze your mouse movements and prove that you're going to get a disease of the
right.
brain one day. Yeah, what would
So
that?
here's
from
the
the
piece
math
of data for you. I mean, I'm going to take a bio break.
Yeah, sure.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay.
Right. So if you are the credit insurance company, I mean, unless you have enough data to confidently insure somebody else's credit, right?
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't take on that business, would you?
Well, yeah, see, the thing is, usually it used to be like, here's an application. You don't look at the person, you just use the data on the application, which they've reported. Here's their jobs, here's their history, and then that's used in an actuarial process to come up with a rate. So the problem is, where does privacy come in? So, and it's in all areas of life. People want some privacy so that they don't, it's a question of that there's a fight there between the company and the applicant. It's really a negotiation. So even like a hiring, how much can you really find out about the person you're hiring legally?
I know, so that's a complicated question. So for example, unless you tell Google where you are, the Google map is useless to you.
Yeah, but the employer can search for social media profiles with your name. But what if they find what if that's not who I am and they think I did something bad? They don't hire me. Yeah.
That's right. Again, yeah. The way I think about it is that we need to go through the stages of know enough to be dangerous, and you give out more information than you should, and you say, like we are recorded right now. You know, if you give away your bank password right now,
we know we're being recorded now, so we're
right.
careful. But what about kids? Because in the schools, there are biometric devices as they're using computers in schools that have been for years. They've been capturing this data and profiling kids. So who gets to use that data? Maybe Microsoft has it. Maybe they'll give it to a police department or something. Who knows?
Exactly. Right. So it's like Facebook give away the data. They don't even know they give it away, but all they know is like, okay, you have access to that, and don't tell me how you use it, right?
Yeah, and that's a big thing in Europe with all the GDPR laws. Being the right to be forgotten. Yeah. So society is going through this now, and some model will emerge, but it could be too authoritarian or it could be unbalanced. Yeah. So, and there's different opinions across the world.
So the question is, knowing what we know about the data collection and privacy issue, what's the optimizations for that? Where's the function for that?
That's a good project for Barry.
Not in the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats don't do functions. Bureaucrats, by definition, are dysfunctional.
Yeah. So
I asked this question. This is a little bit like who's buried in Grant's tomb. If you have a dysfunctional system, what's missing? I used to ask that question. People don't know. It's like Groucho Marx would say, "Who's buried in Grant's tomb?" and they don't know. If you have a dysfunctional system, what's missing?
And there are degrees of dysfunction.
The more sophisticated the required function is, the more likely it's missing.
Say more about that.
Well, so for example, in that inventory management one, where the optimal function is simply little m, big M, when the inventory falls below little m, you order back up to big M. So the function that you have to provide is a very simple function. But if it's a much more complicated function, then chances are your system is dysfunctional, and what's missing is the complicated function that you really would need to stay in business, to have a high functioning organization. And so the more complicated the required function is, the more likely it is that it's not there. It's broken, missing, or it's crude. And we're living in increasingly dysfunctional cultures.
Yeah.
Living in 21st century, and we have very complicated systems, and they're often the thing that makes them functional is missing. Personnel, policies, or funding, or whatever you need.
Yeah, the conclusion I draw from all that is that if you want to increase the rate of success, you need to give up your expectation. The higher the expectation is, the rate of success go down the hill.
Well, people
depends on the clientele. If you're serving the general public, fast food, Burger King and McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken are fine. If you're trying to serve the upper class, then you got to provide a more sophisticated service.
Right. That's why they go to 5-star restaurant with a Michelin star or whatever you call it.
Exactly. So Henry Ford wanted everybody to have cars. And Maserati only wanted rich people to have cars, to serve a different clientele.
So you're saying that the market could be sort of contracting to only a few choices eventually. Or
That's the market for that. That's again, that's McDonald's and there's a 5-star Michelin
Well,
restaurant.
but look what happened with COVID. Like only the big box stores were open. Like the Walmarts were open during COVID.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they had to be open, or else they would basically have to close up shop because they were
Right.
expensive to operate. Big stores
Right.
expensive to operate.
But the mom and pop stores failed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And they went back to the Sears catalog mechanism where you sold you sold through the catalog, and which in this case is the internet. And that's why FedEx and Amazon shipping and all these, except that Yellow went out of business. That one truck company that had less than a truckload went out of business. But FedEx and UPS and all those, they did quite well.
yeah. So it's a good model to analyze what happened and how do we want to increase, prevent things in the future, or are there better ways to handle that?
And UPS says we have no contact drop off.
Yep.
We'll put it on your porch and ring your doorbell, and then you got to make sure that it doesn't sit there for 3 days.
Exactly. Yep. And you'll have drones delivering stuff. Drones following you. Yeah. All right. Well, I got to get going, but it's been fun.
All right.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Good to have you.
Yeah, sure. Nice seeing you. Take it easy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Just you and me, my friend.
Yeah, and we don't have to go on until 1 o'clock if you got better things to do.
We good. I can stop right now. It's all good.
But I'm looking for help in explaining why rule-based regulation is kindergarten and not good enough. And what's better is function-based, protocol-based, function-based, and you got to have more education, more information processing.
Have you tried ChatGPT 4.0 and see what it says on explaining to a 7-year-old or whatever?
I should do that. Yeah, maybe I'll do that this afternoon.
Yeah, that would be the
Explain
easiest way to
protocols
do
and
it.
functions too.
So I'm trying to understand because I put all my response back from ChatGPT about the difference and make the difference between function and rule on the chat box.
Let me open that. Didn't happen to have it open. That's long.
Yeah, so I put the summary on top because it does give you the protocol are much more specialized. It's a smaller scope, right? And often designed to facilitate a specific task.
Let's see, there it is. Rules tend to be broader and more general purpose, designed to govern behavior. Yeah, but also simpler to understand and to implement, so that a child can play a rule-based board game.
Right.
Because a kindergartner can understand a rule. And if you say it's protocol-based, a child will probably be at a tremendous cognitive disadvantage.
So to me, I look at it as a protocol is more, like you say, it's a custom suit that you need to, the styles, get on the platform, right?
So for example, if you're giving somebody directions and they've never been to your place, you'll give them easy to follow directions, which are not optimal, but they can't get lost. If you're going to tell them how to get to your place every day, you'll give them all the shortcuts.
Right.
So that you'll avoid the traffic and have the shorter distance, but you're going to have to make turns at smaller streets. And the whole idea of protocol is it can be optimized, but you'd only do it if you're going to use it routinely. If I give a stranger directions to my house, I'll give them the easiest way to follow, which is not the shortest way or the fastest way.
Based on the explanation I see here, protocol is a subset of rule, if you want to think of it that way. Rule is for the general public, protocol is for very specific issues, it's a fine-tuning version of the rule.
Yeah, it's more flexible. So for example, in a rule-based system, there's often a penalty if you break a rule. But in the arts, there's no penalty if you break a rule. You become what's the word I'm looking for? An artist. An artist breaks the rules.
I think based on rule because they are still within the rule. Because
Basically, if you listen to any person who is a master of painting or music or whatever, they learn all the rules and then they determine how to break the rules to be unique and but better, more artistic.
Thank you. This is a very good example. I'm going to zoom in on that. Okay, so a rule for artists is not a rule for driving. A rule of driving, you can kill someone with a driving rule if you break the rule. A rule for artists is a totally different rule. It just tells you to make it more efficiently. You can paint something that looks like a human being if you follow my rule, right? So a rule of artists, again, is a rule that guiding you to do the thing so you can do this more efficiently and more, follow the traditions, whatever you want to call that, right? Now, the rule of driving, if you break the rule, you go to jail for that in case of the big mess up, right? So it's a two different rules. That's why you need to chunk it down to like, what's the difference between the rule of artist versus the rule of the driver?
Yeah. If there's a pothole on your lane and you don't want to destroy your car,
right?
You'll go around the pothole even if you're going in the lane you're not supposed to be in.
Okay, so that's a rule. That you can only go to the next lane, provided you're not crashing into somebody else, somebody walking.
Right.
Again,
you have to know that it's important to break the rule for safety reasons or special conditions where you are knowingly breaking the rule, because if you follow the rule, you're dead.
Yeah, I love the example. So that's exactly the rule for pilot, but rule of pilot is?
Do what you think is best.
No. Stay alive.
Stay alive. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, stay alive.
Yeah, stay alive. And you can break all the rules you want in the whole FAA regulation.
To stay alive, right.
To stay alive. That's a rule of pilot, according to my dear friend Anton, that tells me about he's an instructor for pilots. The rule of pilot is that you throw the rule out the window, stay alive. That's your rule.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So again, the rule of pilot is different from the rule of the driver, because the rule of pilot, what's the difference? Because you don't have an airplane to crash to, because it's all sky, because you don't affect anybody else. So, but the rule of the driver on the road, that you go into from avoiding pothole and you crash somebody, you will be penalized, you'll be punished, you go to jail for it or whatever you call that, right? So but the difference between the rule of driver and the rule of artist, what's the rule of artist?
Be artistic.
Be artistic and when you draw a human being, you look like a human being or whatever you want to call that, right? So the next thing is the rule of artist is very different from the rule of driver.
It's not a rule. Being artistic is by definition not being rule-based.
So the rule is a terrible word to use until you're very specific about what it's applied to. Does it apply to artists or does it apply to a driver?
Yeah. So we tend, because we grow up and we attend grammar school starting in kindergarten and it's all rule-based, a lot of people never realize that there are other regulatory mechanisms which are more sophisticated than rule-based. That's all they ever know.
Let's focus on the rule in the kindergarten. Okay, what are the rules of kindergarten? Because I want to zoom in so that we can get this word. The rule is a very fussy word. It's a terrible word to use. Okay,
it's do's and don'ts. Basically, rules are do this and don't do that.
No, okay, zoom that in. Okay, so there are rules in the kindergarten that be nice to your neighbor, don't eat your neighbor's lunch.
Yeah, no yelling, no hitting,
no yelling, no hitting. So there are some, okay, so if you chunk it down,
no stealing.
Okay, there are things that piss people off. There are people that get you into trouble. There are rules that be nice to people. That's one you want to be, blend into the group. So there are many types of different rules.
And up to a point, rules are the optimal way to regulate things. But at some point, they either become dysfunctional or they don't do what's needed to be done. And you've got to evolve. So when they invented the internet, they had to evolve, they had to build it on protocols. If you built the internet on rules, you couldn't build the internet.
It doesn't work. Okay. So go back to kindergarten because it's much easier. Okay. So what are the simple rules because internet people cannot relate to it, but let's
show up on time.
Okay.
You can make the whole point is you have to make it, but now if you have 3 dozen rules in kindergarten, can a kindergartner keep in mind 3 dozen rules?
And that's why they take 3 years to get a kindergartner to learn all this rules, right? So my point to you is that if you look at the rule of kindergarten very carefully and chunk it down a little bit more, that some of the rules are actually protocol.
Yeah, I mean, teaching English grammar. English grammar is not very rule based. You can
Right.
teach rules of English grammar. If you follow the rules, you're not speaking English anymore.
Right. So what are the other protocol they teach in kindergarten?
That's a good question because I've been in kindergarten for a long time. So
Right. So you know best. You know best. So what are the protocol? It's not rule based in kindergarten that you're still using it today.
Well, one of the things I think that I don't know if they do this in kindergarten or not, but when you're communicating with somebody, look at them.
Yeah.
Face to face, eyeball to eyeball. Recognize when they are done talking and when it's your turn. So taking turns is not just take turns. It's how do you know when it's your turn?
Yeah.
That's not obvious when it's your turn.
That's not rule at all. That's protocol.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So that's not when you eat, are you allowed to take your food out and chew it and play with your food?
Yeah. Or protocol is I have a peanut butter sandwich and you have a ham sandwich, and we both like each other's food. I'll give you half of my ham sandwich and for half of your peanut butter sandwich.
Right. So again, that's protocol.
It makes both people happier.
That's right. Exactly right. My point to you is that they're so interchangeable that you cannot argue one to the other because they only see it one way, you see the other way.
But it's negotiable.
That's right.
Protocols are negotiable and rules are not negotiable.
Okay, so another thing is that, is it okay for me to put my hand over your shoulder? Is that in the rule base or the protocol base?
Protocol based, because I have to say it's okay.
That's right.
If it's not okay, you have to know that it's okay or not okay. And the only way that you can know if it's okay or not okay is if I consent or don't consent.
That's right.
So protocols involve consent, negotiation and consent.
So protocol, that's why he's talking about. Protocol are very specific for certain behavior. You have feedback. It has consent. It has, all the different interaction between human beings that rule cannot, cover.
A good one, in starting around 3rd or 4th grade, if the teacher asks a question of the class, I had to learn not to volunteer the answer without giving other people a chance, because I might be a little bit faster with the answer. And if I always do what's best for me, I'm hurting my classmates.
Yeah.
And I had to learn, and it's not a rule, but I had to learn how to hold back so that I don't dominate the question and answer stuff.
That's right. That's right.
But on the other hand, what I learned is that I volunteer when I'm really sure, and I hold back when I'm not sure, so that almost every time I answer, I have the correct answer. And so I look smarter than I really am.
That's right.
I'm deferring when I'm not sure.
That's right.
And that was a trick I used to advantage myself while giving other people a chance.
That's right. And you don't talk to your teacher, ask for teacher to do something when he or she is mad.
I don't think I ever had that issue, but I learned to game the system a little bit to make myself look better than I really was.
That's right. And that's protocol. That's not rule at all.
And by the way, the one time I really noticed it is that one time when I was sure of myself and I gave an answer, I realized later the answer was wrong. But the teacher took my word for it because I always had the right answer.
Yeah. See?
So she expected the answer to be right and didn't bother to realize that I'd given a slightly incorrect answer. I had to figure that out for myself. So epistemology.
That's right.
You basically end up not learning epistemology, double checking yourself.
So the other way of the protocol, I'm kind of complicated on this one here, is that when you learn something, you actually, if you will say the answer, you can learn it better than if you just keep your answer to yourself and not saying it. Yep. Do you realize that? Yeah,
there are occasions where, for example, if a student not so much if a student gave a wrong answer, because that's commonplace. If the teacher said the wrong thing inadvertently.
Right.
Instead of saying that the teacher was wrong, I would ask a question as if I didn't understand the answer.
That's right.
And when I was in 3rd or 4th grade, I could correct the teacher by playing dumb and asking a question. And then the teacher would correct themselves. By the time I got to high school, I couldn't get away with that anymore. They knew damn well that I was correcting the teacher.
Right. Yeah, I know. I've been there, done that. And that's protocol. So some people call emotional IQ.
Yeah. And the point is that I could get away with it when I was young enough to pretend to be naive when I wasn't.
Right.
And then after a while, I couldn't pull off that trick.
Yeah, the way I explain to the teacher is sort of like, I pick up this piece of the puzzle and try to put it in, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. Can you help me to fit that into the puzzle?
So a lot of protocols are kind of ad hoc. You not actually express protocols, and you pick up protocols of politeness by some process where you don't actually go to finishing school.
Right.
They send you to finishing school to learn to be polite. They don't do that in public school.
Yeah.
So public school is a little bit crude and rude in places because getting the right answer is more important than being polite.
Right. And if I can say this differently, generalization wise, if I take a lot of protocol into the same group of things, like protocol how to share lunch with my classmate, then it become a rule. Because what happened was 2 kids, to rush to the hospital, call 911 because they eat the wrong food. The peanut butter had mold in it or something like that.
Now they're allergic to peanuts, right?
Yeah, or allergy to peanuts, and you're not supposed to share food with your teammate. Now they turn that protocol into a rule.
Yeah, don't share your food because you may transmit a disease. You've handled food. You've handled your food. You don't give it to somebody else, even though your mother handled your food to feed you as a baby.
Right.
So it becomes environmentally dependent. Becomes a function which varies from one circumstance to the next.
So, and again, let me go back and summarize this. Like when the function, when a protocol become generalized and cause problem, then the rule have to step in. The
rule is the simple version which always applies, but it's not the most efficient.
That's right.
So, for example, they lower the speed limit at night on some roads. A lot of highways, at least in the 50s, had daytime and nighttime speeds because you had less illumination at night and you needed not to drive so fast on the highway. The problem is that, well, how do I know if it's day or night?
That's right.
It's at dusk. What's the correct speed at dusk?
That's right.
So
another way of using another times that I see the word protocol showed up is like when a prime minister of a certain country visit our country, there's a protocol going on or something along that line. So it's a very specific and very case, one-time deal, exceptional thing. So it cannot be generalized. I would do this to this, become a rule to do it this way. So protocol, I call it exceptional situation handlings.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of what we do that's sophisticated is not rule-based because rule-based is too crude.
Yeah.
And there's a famous scene in the Harry Potter series where Hermione is sort of the very one who's very rule-driven. She never wants to break the rules. And they're up against a situation where they have a challenge, and she realizes that in order to solve the problem at hand, they're going to have to break the rules. And when she announces that, it's a big revelation. Ron says to Hermione, "Who are you and what have you done with Hermione?" Because she's talking about now breaking the rules for the first time. But she realizes that to be functional, you have to break the rules.
Yeah. Like I say, the pilot rule, throw out the window.
Right. Don't die.
Yeah, that's it. Because I don't care whatever rule you follow, it doesn't work,
Your basic passion story of the New Testament and a lot of hero stories, a lot of stories are about the hero is the one who breaks the rules and saves the day.
Yeah. Again, that's the pilot metaphor that works really well. In order for me to save you, I have to throw the rule out the window or whatever.
And then I'm going to be criticized and punished for breaking the rule, even though I saved the day.
Right. Yeah. That was an instant. I don't remember exactly when was that, about a year ago. There was an incident that where a couple and the baby stroller was crossing the street, and there was a fast running car would run through a red light, and another car jammed in between them, so that save the
Save the
couple
baby, smashed up
baby.
his own car to save the baby.
That's right. So they break the rule.
Right. Yeah, but for a higher purpose. So this higher purpose notion, which is theological and spiritual and wise and all this kind of stuff, you break the rules to save the day.
Yeah. And you break many rules to save the day as well. So it's like same thing, you do whatever need to be done.
Right.
So for example, you're using your neighbor's internet, that's breaking the rule.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, we see this is why I have always trouble following the rule. I'm a rule breaker. I hate to tell you that.
That's because you're functional. If you want to be functional, you're going to end up breaking the rules. Not every time, but more often than not, you're going to end up breaking the rules in order to be functional. And that's how you stay in business and get your business done.
Yeah.
And break the rules to get your business done. Now, if you do it too much, that's called a criminal enterprise.
That's right.
The trick is how to be a functional enterprise without being declared. Say Bell Laboratories or the Bell system, which is highly functional, was declared to be a criminal enterprise.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, let me tell you a funny story, right? 40 years ago, 1983, when I started my own business, so I wrote about 10 books about how to start a small business. I finished reading all the book. You know what my conclusion was?
No, I don't know.
If I follow all the rules, I'll never start my business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. In order to have a competitive advantage, you have to do better than everybody else. So if everybody else is following the rules, then you can be more functional and outperform them.
Right. And knowing what rule you can break without going to jail.
Exactly. A lot of times, if it was a fine, the fine was the cost of doing business, because if you paid the fine, it was less than the amount of money you made by breaking the rule to pay the fine.
That's right. You got it.
You'll park your car and get a ticket for overtime parking because the amount of money you're making by staying in the meeting and concluding the meeting is worth more than the $15 you're going to pay for for overtime parking.
Have you heard a joke, the story about Bill Gates always leave his car, his SUV in front of the airport?
No, I don't know that story.
He just ran to the airport last minute when people on the plane take off, and he parked the car right in front of the gate, and he just ran towards it and leave the car there.
I actually did that one time when we were running late. I was taking a rental car to an airport in Philadelphia, and we're running late, and I went to the ticket counter. I said, "Do I have enough time to take the car back to the rental?" She says, "No, you got to get to the gate right now." So I gave her the keys, and I said, "Please call the rental company and tell them to come get the car," because I didn't have time to return the car before.
Yeah, but do we have a proper parking space? No, he doesn't. He parked right in front of the car. He just parked the car in front of the door of the gate, or the airport door, and run to the gate. That's how he does it every time, every day.
Well, see, I only did that one time because we were stuck in traffic and we arrived late. I didn't allow an extra hour to get to the airport.
Something like the sister said, like he knows he can afford the fine or the toll fee or whatever.
So I knew that I was putting a burden on the ticket taker, the airline ticket taker, but the alternative was I'm going to miss the flight.
Yeah,
which is worse.
Yeah,
lesser two evils.
Yeah. So again, are you a little bit more clear now the protocol between protocol and rules a little bit? Chunking it down.
My challenge is how to explain it to somebody who thinks they're the same thing, who thinks they're so different.
Well, they are the same thing in many ways. It's what my point is. They're the same thing in many ways, except that if I want to think about it this way, remember the big circle, small circle? Protocol is a small circle inside a big circle. It's a subset of rule.
Yeah. Well, it's a subset of a regulatory mechanism.
Yeah.
It's a sophisticated regulatory mechanism. Whereas if you tried to make a protocol into a rule, you have lost the functionality that you wanted for the protocol.
So then the rule and the photo, and then they become like this, a two circles crossing each other then.
I'm not sure how I do that. I think the Venn diagram would be confusing. Because I think of it as a more sophisticated method, that the language of rules isn't a powerful enough language to express a protocol.
Okay, that's why we are trying different ways to present it graphically so that we get it right. It's not, there's no one size fit all.
No, I do it this way. You got rules, protocols, functions, models, systems. They're an ascent. They're the next floor up of the building. The ground floor, the basement, the second floor. Each, as you go up floors, you have more freedom to do more sophisticated things that you can't have done. The lower levels can't do them at all.
Okay, so let's talk about that, right? So protocol, we agree that the protocol is much more specific, applied to special case. That the rule is more generalized. So the rule is big,
right.
Generalized.
You can't make a segue out of rules. If you try to make a segue using rules, you don't make a segue. You make something that falls over.
That's exactly right. So protocol is a very specific, applied to a specific case.
Right.
And rules
allows you to do something that you can't do with rules.
So that's what we talk about, like sharing a sandwich. Your classmate was fine 50 years ago, and 35 years ago is not fine because somebody died from it or whatever. So the protocol become a rule.
Yeah. So now you outlaw sharing food, except if the kid next to you is starving to death.
Right.
You save their life by giving them food, which might make them sick, but they're not going to die of starvation.
But you break the rule.
Break the rule.
Yeah, you break the rule. So again, how do you present that in the way that, so when you explain to people, how do you explain that?
The answer is ineffectively. I explain it ineffectively and I fail to explain it.
I don't think this explains certain thing is so hard to explain because the relationship is so complex that you cannot, for example, you cannot explain isolysis triangle in 2 words because you have to use the square root of all that stuff. So you need more words to explain the protocol.
I don't know if you saw what you just did. Suppose I say, put your hands together, and I can't. They bump. But then you did that.
Yeah.
Now, the rule is don't put your hand in the same place as somebody else's hand. That's the Pauli exclusion principle.
Right.
Okay. Fermions can't be in the same place except, well, they can if they interleave them. So something that's more subtle than don't bump into somebody. Well, but you can hold hands.
Yeah.
And the notion that you can do something that's against the rules by mutual consent, you can do that.
Yeah, because you have a higher purpose for it. So like you say, I break the rule to save my friend's life because he's hungry to death, right?
I'm going to walk across the street and hold your hand because I don't want you to walk on your own because you don't have the faculty to dodge the traffic.
Right, exactly right. So again, take more words and chunk it down and use example like the food things, all that stuff. That's why language is such a beautiful word from my perspective. Is like it's confusing. Like the word rule is so confusing in different content.
Right. Yeah.
So you can use the word that you talked about yesterday multiple times. Like the medium is the message, right? The word is the message.
I used to say that language is a tool for encrypting information.
Yep, agree. That's right. Language is a tool.
It's a tool,
a message.
but it doesn't encode information, it encrypts it.
Yeah, it encrypts it because unless you know how to decrypt it, you won't get the gift of the language.
Yeah. So I can say something that if you write the sentence down, it's a perfectly grammatical sentence that has a clear meaning. But if I use a vocabulary term or a sentence structure that's grammatically correct but tricky, then when you try to figure out what the sentence says, you get the wrong semantics.
Yeah. Also, the language also have the culture behind it. For example, when I come to the United States, when I say certainty versus sure.
I saw a great one yesterday. Take the following sentence. I never said we should kill him. 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 They never said we should kill him. They never said we should kill him. They never said we should kill him. Depending on which word I emphasize, it could have different semantics.
That's right.
Every single word can be independently stressed, and that changes the semantics.
Okay.
I never said we should kill him.
So how could you frame the word rule and protocol in one sentence that would tell the difference, make the difference so easily?
I don't know. I mean, that's the problem that I've been up against and not successfully solved in general since I became. See, I didn't really. I mean, I heard the word protocol when I was a kid, but I didn't really know what it meant. And then when the internet came along, and then it's called the Internet Protocol and TCP/IP. Now the word protocol has a mathematical meaning.
So ask ChatGPT this: how do you use the word protocol and rule in one sentence? Explain to a seventh grader.
Did you type that in, or do I need to go do it?
Let me see. You can type it as I'm doing it also.
Because I got to go to a different window to do that.
Okay, let's do it. How to explain
the difference between rule and protocol in one simple sentence.
The difference between rules and protocol in one simple sentence to a 9-year-old. How's that? All right.
Yeah,
one long sentence.
Long sentence.
I'm going to copy and paste
it. You can paste it into the chat.
I will.
Rules are like the basic guidelines we follow to be fair and safe, like not running in the hallway. See, kindergarten, right? Well, protocols are special steps we take, steps plural, okay? Not single step, but multiple steps to make sure specific things function properly. The word work means function properly, like the way you set up a board game before playing. So yeah,
Would that answer your question? That's what I want to know.
Oh, well, the only way to know is to try it out on Sam or anybody and see if they get it. Because when I try to explain things, I think I'm explaining them very clearly.
Yeah.
When I ask the person, tell me back what you just learned, I don't get back what I just told them.
All right, sounds good. Yeah.
And yet you basically have to test. And if you test it with active listening,
yeah,
tell me back what you heard me say, you discover that almost nothing gets the semantics gets lost in the translation.
Yeah, so I want to point out that this give you an explanation, it give you a very specific example that you can relate to a 9-year-old, and give you the contrast of that, and then give you another example to explain that. So that's how you explain something to somebody, especially when they are not quite there yet. Like I say, people walk into a dark room, they bounce into something. All you do is give them a candle, like example, explanation, tell them the difference and make a difference in a very obvious way, instead of like going down to your way of explaining. You have a tendency to go really deep in everything.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
That's because if you don't go deep, you go shallow, and you can't shallows.
One of my invitation for you is go deep as you want until then you come back and stick your neck out of the water.
The other day, I was trying to give a guy a set of instructions in the Toastmasters meeting. And my friend Rob says, no, Barry, give him one rule at a time. Give him one step at a time. Wait a week until he does the one step, then give him the next step and wait another week. You can't give him 3 steps in one sitting. He says he can't, he won't be able to do that.
Yeah.
And I realized, okay, so it's going to take 7 months. 7 months, he will finally bake the cake. Maybe he'll bake the cake in 7 months. The first time he's basically going to open the box of flour.
Yeah.
Then he's going to put the flour in the bowl, and then he's going to add the water, and then he's going to beat it. And
You
so-
can shut it in with 1 day. Find out where he lives, or invite him to your house, one way or the other. You got to go to a common location and do the execution in front of him. Remember, I say some modality. One is to communicate through wording in the text, black and white, or you can kinesthetically, visually, all that senses get into play.
I mean, here's the thing. 6 months ago, he said, I really wish that our webcam could zoom in on the expression on the speaker's face instead of the wide shot. And I said, Fred, you own a Logitech camera. There's a optional zoom function that you can download and use. And I told him about it.
Yeah.
At first I had to research it. So he downloads it. He doesn't know how to install it.
Yeah.
Once he installs it, he doesn't know how to use it. Once he learns how to use it, he can't learn how to keep it on the screen without getting hidden.
Yeah. Yeah.
Finally, 7 months later, well, I'm sure 4 months later, I
Right.
discover that he owns a Sony Handycam with a beautiful Zeiss optical zoom
Right.
that works fine.
Right.
He wanted the function that he used to use 15 years ago. He still owns that camera.
That's right.
I said, bring that camera in. Then I say, oh, I see. I can hook that camera up to this laptop that has an iSync in.
Yeah.
And here I now have your hardware doing what you wanted to do 4 months ago.
That's right.
It took 4 months because each step took like a month.
Yeah.
I said, Fred, do you still own the camera that came with this tripod? This is a Sony branded tripod. He says, yeah, but I don't use it because it's a high 8 tapes.
Right.
I said, we're not doing high 8 tapes. We want direct video. He says, I don't know if it can do direct video. I bring it in, I'll tell you if it can do direct. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And the way I, as a business, to shorten down the development, I call it development time, R&D time, is I go to follow him home.
Yeah.
And handle that in one afternoon.
The next thing I asked him, I said, Fred, do you still own the laptop that you use this camera with the iLink? He says, I don't think so. And then a week later, he says, I may have given it to my daughter. She may still have it. Well, is she still using it? Well, he doesn't know yet. So first he has to go talk to his daughter to find out if he has the laptop he gave her, whether the laptop he gave her is the one that has the iLink, and number 3, whether she's still using it or if it's sitting collecting dust in the closet. Yeah. And then he's got to retrieve it and bring it into me, and then I got to update it from XP to Windows 10. So each step literally takes 2 weeks.
Again, I want to remind you, this is called the protocol that you're referring to, a very specific step that's required to optimize the situation.
Right. And the point is that the protocol is not in one sitting. The protocol is a week between steps.
Yeah. And it takes a smarter person to execute a protocol.
Yep.
You don't need a very smart person to execute a rule.
Exactly. And Fred is not a very smart person.
It's not that he's not very smart. It's not that smart in this particular category of knowledge.
I'll tell you where he was smart. He started a janitorial company where he hired people from Guatemala to do the work and paid them a small amount of wages. And then he charged the company more money for the janitorial work. So he got rich.
Right.
But he made money by hiring cheap labor to do the work, and he basically was the
difference. Yeah,
pocket the difference. And so he could buy, expensive
whatever he needed.
He could buy this really nice camera, but then he doesn't know that it has functions that he wants.
Right.
He doesn't know how to exercise the functions.
But he's smart in terms of hiring cheap labor and pocket the difference. So as I say, so when people are not so smart, they are not so smart on the specific part of the education need. Anyway, it's 10 o'clock.
Okay, good chat. I need to save the chat one more time because there's one more item in it. And I got to stop the recording. That's me, right?
Right.
Where's the recording up here? Stop.